Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
A look at Carolina Beach, proof that tropical systems that don't receive an official name from the NHC can still pack a destructive punch. A discussion on the Carolinas, plus a look at an area that we're watching for development next week, coming up on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Yeah, take a look at this video here, folks. This is from Kathy Wilson via Storyful at Carolina Beach, and this is the remnants, or really the aftermath, of Potential Tropical Cyclone 8 that hit, of course, the Carolina coast, and causing more flooding than I think people there probably would expect, given the fact that this was not a tropical storm. This was not a hurricane. Perfect opportunity to introduce our meteorologist today. Joining me, as always, meteorologist Rebecca Barry here at WFLA, but our featured meteorologist, CBS 17 Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein. And Wes, let's just start with this video real quick, because it really speaks volumes to what they experienced down there in the coastal area of North Carolina.
Yeah, so that's Carolina Beach, which by distance and time in the car is the closest way to get your feet in the sand from everyone who lives in Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, the Triangle. So a lot of us are familiar with that beach. Carolina Beach, though, is an island. You got to go over a big bridge over the Intercoastal Waterway to get to this thin stretch of land that is Carolina Beach. So you got the Intercoastal on one side, you got the ocean on the other. And when you get 18 inches of rain and onshore winds, ocean water's coming up a little, lots of rain coming down. And wow, what an amazing display of Mother Nature yesterday along our coastline.
So Potential Tropical Cyclone 8, of course, impactful, but in the history books, it will not receive a name. We are currently up to G in the alphabet, with Gordon out there in the Atlantic. For the latest, let's actually get the latest from, of course, meteorologist Rebecca Barry. And Rebecca, it's peak hurricane season, but this is what we're looking at.
Exactly. And I think a lot of us, myself included, assumed we would be much further in the alphabet at this point, just based on those unprecedented warm waters that we saw at the beginning of the season. But unprecedented is unprecedented. We've never seen waters that warm. And so therefore, we didn't really know what's going to happen. So it's been interesting to watch this play out. The long-term forecast models haven't done great. They've continued to say something's going to develop, it's about to start. And then when we get there, nothing's really going on. Now, that being said, we did have Potential Tropical Cyclone 8 this week, and now we're watching an area to the south of Cuba for the potential development next week. But once again, forecast models have routinely been very wrong this season. And so moving forward, let's go ahead and see what we have in your forecast for you here. Potential Tropical Cyclone 8, and then the remnants of Gordon. So Gordon is not technically anything anymore. Those maximum winds are 30 miles per hour as of that 11 a.m. advisory. It's moving to the north at 5 miles per hour. Gordon has and remains the perfect fish storm out there in the middle of nowhere, not bothering anybody or doing anything, and it will continue to do so. Long-term forecast models bring that rain into the northern Atlantic by the end of the week. So not worried about Gordon. We're still watching the potential flooding from Potential Tropical Cyclone 8 there, and it's been a really rough go across parts of North Carolina, as I'm sure Wes can tell us, especially right there along the coastline. And now it's moving into the Virginia, the heaviest of the rain, as you can see from what's left over of Potential Tropical Cyclone 8. And that's a little bit of a mouthful, but it is the perfect designation. The reason that they created this Potential Tropical Cyclone designation is when a system that isn't anything yet, it's not a depression, it's not a storm, is so close to land that they needed to start to issue watches and warnings to warn people that they might see flooding, like with the video that we just saw. And so that's what this designation is for. This one ended up not forming into a depression or a tropical storm and getting a name. Thank goodness it didn't get any stronger. It was just too close to land. It didn't have time to. But that's what this designation's for. And in this case, it did its job, this designation, because it did allow people to issue those forecast products. It did allow people to issue those watches and warnings that we might see what we saw. Look at these 7-day rainfall totals. 21 inches. It looks like pretty close to Wilmington. And then a little bit further north than that, near New Bern, they got between 9 and 12.8 inches. And these are radar estimated rainfall totals. And so it's just a general broad overview of what we saw. I'm sure they have some measured rainfall totals that are even more specific and more impressive. But even back out towards Charlotte, you've got over 2 inches of rain. In Greenville, around 3/4 of an inch of rain. So a lot of this is, from Fayetteville to Lumberton, all the way down to Florence, all the way out to Myrtle Beach. And it's really the vacation spots that got hit the hardest, the coastline. Much like here in Florida, the coastline of the Carolinas is where everybody heads every chance they get, and that's really who got hit the hardest in terms of rainfall and unfortunately flooding, as we saw from that other video. Moving forward, we still have a potential risk for rainfall. It's mainly north of the Carolina coast at this point, moving through Virginia, and especially right there along the coastline, we expect some pretty heavy rainfall. The additional rainfall totals through the end of the week could be another inch to an inch and a half in the heaviest areas. It looks like the Carolinas aren't in for too much more rain, which is good news. Of course, any rain does add insult to injury there. The low pressure system starting to pull away from the coast there and drier air moving in. It'll be a much welcome break from all the rain that they've seen. It doesn't quite get through all of South Carolina, though. They still have quite a bit of moisture there. That low pressure, as it continues to move away, will probably aid in dragging down a little bit more dry air across all of the Carolinas. Which brings us to our next point, what we're watching next. And I did preface this by saying, 2 weeks ago, the GFS and the Euro were locked in on a system that never happened. Well, right now, the GFS and occasionally the Euro are locked in on some potential for formation here just to the south of Cuba in the Caribbean. And so the Western Caribbean in 7 to 10 days is showing signs of a low pressure system. And so our chief meteorologist, Jeff Berardelli, showed this last night. This is the area to watch 8 to 10 days out from now. And so when we put the Euro and the GFS on here just to compare them, you can see that both of them do form a very weak low to the south of Cuba. And then the Euro, which is in red there, moves it into the more western Gulf, whereas the GFS brings it a little bit closer to home here in Tampa. And so we're watching this very closely. It has varied wildly from model run to model run. The Euro goes on again, off again, as if it even forms, whereas the GFS goes, yesterday it was calling for a Mexican landfall, and now it's calling for a Florida landfall. So when a system hasn't formed yet and it's this far out, there's a ton of uncertainty with it. And that's why we say not to fall in love with one model run, 240 hours out, which a lot of people like to post on the internet to get clicks. We're not here for that at all. But this is the area in the ocean with the most available ocean energy, the warmest sea surface temperatures right there. And so if we did have anything spin up, we'd have to watch it carefully for signs of intensification, because that would certainly be possible with those warm sea surface temperatures. And just echoing on where we are in the season, the peak of the season was technically last week, but we still have half the season to get through in terms of activity. And so there's where we are in terms of when we typically see the highest number of hurricanes and tropical storms. And in yellow, it's the highest number of hurricanes. They echo each other pretty closely and they follow each other pretty closely. And leaving you with that list of names that we thought would be a lot further down. Helen next up on the list if we do see that development down in the Caribbean. And so that's the forecast that we have for you today. We'll be watching that area in the Caribbean very closely, and also those model runs that have been swinging back and forth.
I'll bring Wes back in here, our featured meteorologist joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, JB and Rebecca here with you on the right side of your screen. We're going to start to take questions here in a little bit, probably the next 5 minutes or so. So you can start typing in your questions now with hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey Wes, hashtag Hey JB. We'll look for them on Facebook Live and really across social media. But Wes, let's bring you in here. And Rebecca, if we can just spotlight some of our graphics.
Mm-hmm.
Wes, what stands out to you? Potential Tropical Cyclone 8, this system that the models can't seem to agree on just yet. Seems pretty early down there, of course, to our south. What stands out to you so far in this episode?
Well, I think, like everyone, we're wondering why we are not farther along on this name list. We've got the warmest ocean water we've ever seen. So that should have set the stage for us to be talking about going into that third column already. So there's no definitive answer right now is why are we only on G when everything the science has told us that this was going to be a bigger year? We still haven't figured it out. Probably take us into next year to figure it out, but not that I'm complaining, but it's just interesting how the atmosphere has rejected all this formation far out in the open waters of the Atlantic. But Rebecca, we're heading into September, October, where all the formation turns back to the Gulf and the Caribbean, where it seems like that little roadblock hasn't got there yet. So is this when things are really going to start to fire up the second half of the season?
And that's our fear, especially since several of our meteorologists have vacations in October. That is our fear, that we have kind of a late start to the season. And that's what we've been talking about with this formation in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean really being the zone. And one thing Chief Meteorologist Jeff Baradelli brought up to me a couple of weeks ago was how warm the upper levels of the atmosphere are over the open Atlantic right now. And so there's no real reason for the hot air to rise, because it's a pretty unique setup where basically high pressure over the entire Atlantic, and he thinks it'll start to cool down a bit over the next couple of weeks, and that may be something that would kick off a little bit more formation. And so at this point, just like we've been talking about, we're all just kind of spitballing, like, why is it? Why is this happening? What are the reasons? And we'll look back and study this season for a while, and to figure out those factors to help us moving forward when we do see similar conditions, what we can expect out of a hurricane season. Because for so long it has been warm waters, more storms,
right.
Less shear, more storms, that sort of a thing. And so there certainly seem to be more complex factors at play this year, and it'll be interesting to see what ends up defining us.
Yeah, all the signs were there. Is it Saharan dust alone that has killed the season? It has a lot to do with it, but it's probably not the only thing. I love beach vacations in October because the rates go down and there's less people there, but that ocean water is still warm enough. And the problem in the Gulf, as you guys know, Gulf and Caribbean, you can get these systems that form and intensify really quickly. I mean, how many times over the years has something started off as a depression, and we go into a weekend and everyone comes back to work and school on Monday, watching the news again, and all of a sudden we've got a hurricane that's on our doorstep. So that's the big concern about this time of year, especially with that warm water down there.
Yeah, so the warm water's right there, exactly where you're talking about the formation zone shifts to this time of the year. So that's the biggest concern, is rapid intensification.
So as we look at what's expected really in the coming days, as we are post statistical peak in September, of course, with when we get the most activity in a traditional hurricane season. But as we look here at that doesn't mean that we're through this just yet by any means, folks. We still have a long ways to go here. But my question for Wes and Rebecca is, should people anticipate a really hectic October? I mean, is that the way that things are shaping up here? Or do these trends, could they continue?
I'll start. So I'm just thinking back to what we dealt with yesterday. Whatever, Helen that never happened, PTCA, coastal low, rain-making low, whatever, that happened on the backside of the peak. Yesterday was also the 25th anniversary of Hurricane Floyd hitting the Carolinas. That was one of the worst ever. I want everyone to Google pigs on roof, Hurricane Floyd. Hurricane Floyd was the storm that dumped mass amounts of water. And we have a lot of farmers in eastern North Carolina. There was so much water. It was 10 days after Tropical Storm Dennis. I mean, it was bad flooding. And we've seen pictures of people on roofs getting rescued. There is a very large pig farming population in eastern North Carolina. Most of the pork that the East Coast eats comes from us in North Carolina. There were pigs on roofs where water was on the roof. It was an amazing, historic, devastating storm, and it happened after the peak. I think Isabel, that a lot of people in the Southeast know, that anniversary is coming up. There are so many devastating storms that happen on the backside of the peak day. We all get excited in the summer after we hit that peak hottest day of the summer, and then technically the averages start going down after that. But you always have a really hot day after the peak. You always have a really bad hurricane after the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season.
I believe it was Michael that was in mid to late October too.
Yeah.
In the Panhandle Category 5.
Yep. Matthew hit us in October. So yeah, October is not the end of the season by any stretch of the imagination.
I want to load up some more video. I'm just going to show this here on screen, and Rebecca, please finish that thought. This is also from Storyful. Vicky Stelzer sending this in. I'll get the exact location here. Oh, this is if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Wes, I think it's Cure Beach. If I have that.
Curie Beach.
Curie Beach. Yep. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So this is sent in by Vicky and shows a little bit of what it was like during potential Tropical Cyclone 8. Curie
Beach is right next door to Carolina Beach. It's on that same stretch of island I talk about that's surrounded by water. And so what is today? Tuesday. Yesterday, Monday, when the storm hit, high pressure was way up to the north of us. That high pressure gave us a spectacular weather week last week. Then it kind of moved north and started funneling all these winds from the ocean, from the east. And so those are the winds you're seeing there. Ocean water is really moist. And so we had just a ton of moisture over us. It kind of funneled down like a river rapids, and it funneled down the wind, and it funneled down all that rain, 18 inches in Curie Beach and in Carolina Beach.
Do you think it overperformed in terms of rainfall?
That is the understatement of the hurricane season. I mean, there were no models that forecasted 18 inches of rain. This was just a very unique system. You know, there was a stationary front attached to the low pressure. That's partially why it never became a tropical system. And what are stationary fronts? They're stationary and they don't move. So this band of rain just kept moving over and over and over the same spot, that video you're seeing right there. And that's how, and it wasn't like it was 18 inches over 2 days. It was 18 inches in about 12 hours. So half a day. They were seeing rainfall rates at times of 5 inches an hour, and just incredible.
Wes, I know Rebecca touched on this a little bit in her forecast, but do you agree with the NHC not giving this a Helene designation, not elevating it to tropical storm strength, even though clearly it was an impactful storm?
Right. Yeah. I mean, by the books, you know, because it never broke free of the fronts and became its own individual low pressure entity. It technically wasn't a tropical storm, but you know, one thing I always tell our viewers, we don't care what the name is, we care about the impacts. And you know, those of you who are weather nerds like us and we're watching, you know, social media and internet and broadcasts all over the country. I mean, some people called this future Helene, because that would have been the name. And potential tropical cyclone number 8 is such a long, strenuous word to say. And we don't even like to say it. That's why we called it a coastal low. But yeah, it wasn't a tropical system by definition. Now it brought some tropical moisture. I mean, the humidity levels were off the charts, and that's a tropical atmosphere, but it didn't have it. And, you know, we get caught up in the names because we want to check names off the list, and we retire them, and we make memes about Gordon the fisherman, you know, frozen fish and whatever the case may be. But yeah, it wasn't a tropical system by definition.
Yeah. And just, hey, look, NHC, I know that, you know, potential tropical cyclone 8 makes sense from a scientific standpoint. From a weather graphic standpoint, it's a lot of characters to fit for meteorologists like Wes and Rebecca. Fitting that on a graphic isn't very easy. And not to mention, too, that I've tried putting PTC on a graphic before.
Right.
And I don't think most people have any idea what we're talking about when we say PTC, right?
Whenever we have a potential tropical cyclone in there, I ask for 15 more seconds because I have to explain what potential tropical cyclone is every time. And I know that's our job and I'm not complaining, but I just wish it were a little easier to understand. And then I always get an angry email. It's a hurricane, not a cyclone.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And even some of our anchors were calling it a tropical system, and that's fine. You know, the important thing is when they designate it a PTC, that produces the forecast cone that everyone's used to seeing. And that is so important to triggering a lot of things. For me, every time I say PTC, my brain thinks of PYT, the Michael Jackson song, Pretty Young Thing, back in the 80s. So I'm usually singing that song anytime there's a PTC, PYT, Pretty Young Thing.
That's awesome. Michael Jackson reference on today's edition of Tracking the Tropics. Love it. Let's get to our commenters. Maybe there's some Michael Jackson references out there on Facebook Live. Use a hashtag Hey Rebecca, hashtag Hey Wes, hashtag Hey JB, and we can spotlight your comments. And this is a comment that is very much focused on that possible formation to our south in the Caribbean. Will the formation down near Cuba, could it affect my travel to Tulane to see our Bulls ride the green wave? This is Cliff talking about our USF Bulls football team going to Tulane to play in, I believe, New Orleans on Saturday the 28th. So it's 11 days from now. I mean, we're talking, Cliff, we're getting into some serious long-term forecasting there. I don't think we can give him anything of confidence 11 or so days out, right?
Well, we'll take it as far as we can, which is next Thursday at noon. Right now, the Euro has a weak low in the western open Gulf, and the GFS has a stronger storm approaching southwest Florida. And so once again, these have changed drastically. Every time the models have run, there has been no significant model run pointing towards a particular direction. Just the only consistency here is that we've seen the potential for formation to the south of Cuba and in the Western Caribbean. So it is way too soon to tell. I'm hoping it doesn't affect your trip to Tulane, because I want you to watch them ride the green wave as well. But unfortunately, the answer right now is too soon to tell.
Stay tuned to our future editions of Tracking the Tropics. You can go to trackingthetropics.tv. You can check out Wes's website with CBS 17 or WFLA.com as well. Let's go to the next question. This one actually comes in from the Carolinas, because Olivia says, hashtag KJB, we're getting rain in. Now, Wes, I want to say it like the Toyota car, Corolla, but I have a funny feeling like this might not be the correct pronunciation. She asked, does this have anything to do with that rain? I guess what she's asking is where they're getting rain. Does it have anything to do with potential tropical cyclone 8? So am I close here? Is it Corolla, North Carolina?
You're close. And should we take some time to thank our sponsor, Toyota, for the sponsor? No, it is actually Corolla. And Corolla is famous for having wild horses that still live in the area. So everyone goes to Corolla to see the wild horses. But that is in the northern part of coastal North Carolina, much farther north than the video we've been seeing out of Carolina Beach and Curie Beach that you just showed. But yeah, Corolla is still getting some rain because, remember, PTC 8 was low pressure. Low pressure is always unsettled weather. It's still there. It may be dissipated and no longer being tracked by the Hurricane Center, but we've still got all that unsettled weather over the Carolinas. So yeah, it's still swirling around some clouds, some moisture, and a little bit of rain in Corolla up in the northern part of North Carolina coast. But the problem is now it's kind of slowed down. So it's going to kind of hang around. Nothing like what we saw in the last 24 hours. But yeah, still some unsettled weather, a little bit of rain for the beaches of North Carolina. And
PTC 8, when it is out of there and done, when do we expect it to be a non-factor weather-wise in the days ahead, Wes?
Well, that's an interesting question because, it's not its former self, but it's still kind of hanging around, because if you look at the pattern all across the United States and the open Atlantic, everything's kind of stalled. We're in like this blocking pattern right now. Usually the jet stream, things are just moving across the country one after the other. Everything's kind of in park right now. And so it's going to be several days before we get a sunny day with no rain, just because everything's kind of stalled on the weather pattern all across the country and the Atlantic.
Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein from CBS 17 in Raleigh, North Carolina, joining us on this Tuesday edition of Tracking the Tropics. Before we wrap up, Wes, the floor is yours. I mean, with you and your weather team there at CBS 17, what are some of the things that you're going to be paying close attention to in the days and weeks ahead as we are really now in the thick of hurricane season?
Well, we in the Carolinas and really up the East Coast always worry about systems that form in the Gulf of Mexico. They don't have a direct impact on us with the landfall of a major hurricane, but once they move inland, like every tropical system eventually does, it moves north as a rainmaker. So it's really hard for us to get a direct impact from a major tropical system on our coast this time of year, just because of the way the weather patterns are. But what happens more time than not, something forms in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, hits the Gulf Coast states, and then moves up the East Coast as a big rainmaker. So that's something we will be watching later in September and October, is dissipating tropical systems that drop a bunch of rain. The other thing we will be watching, and I cannot let Tampa get out of here without a sports reference, we will be watching former Carolina Panther Baker Mayfield take you guys to more wins with the Bucs.
Wow, no, hold on. Yep. The applause button.
Why we got rid of him, I wanted to give him more time, but David Tepper, the owner of the Panthers, had other ideas. Yeah, I digress.
We appreciate the Carolina Panthers more than usual in this season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I love the shout out there. Wes Hohenstein, folks, CBS 17's chief meteorologist in Raleigh, North Carolina, for all things Carolina related when it comes to weather, give him a follow, of course, on social media. Wanted to shout out. We got some really nice comments on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. Usually when things are really busy, we don't get a chance to spotlight some of the kind comments, but Chuck, with this one, we really do appreciate all the viewers watching from really, we had some viewers from North Carolina, from here down in Florida, and of course, it's always great to be teaming up with our fellow Next Star meteorologists like Wes. We appreciate you joining us here on this Tuesday edition of Tracking the Tropics, folks. Of course, we are live on this website, app, or social media platform Tuesdays, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central, or whenever storms form. We bring the expertise and experience of our meteorologists across the country right into the palm of your hand to let you know what to expect with the systems that we are tracking. This, of course, has been Tracking the Tropics. We'll see you next time or sooner. We'll be keeping very close attention, monitoring that system to our south and seeing exactly what forms there. But for Wes and Rebecca, I'm JB. We'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics. Take care, folks. Be well.
Find Tracking the Tropics on these platforms. And for storm updates, the latest models, and helpful resources, visit trackingthetropics.tv.